right, this is Morgan Olson, and she teaches 8th and ninth grade science. She has dabbled this year with creating self-motivated learners, and she's going to share with us what she did and then observations of students while working in this method.
Okay, so I picked up this task list from a mentoring meeting from Russell, and decided I'd try it out in my classroom with a couple of different units. And this one was for, I think this was for our speed or our motion unit. So the students, I allowed them to work with who they'd like to, and a natural consequence of them working together with who they wanted was they may have gotten themselves behind, so they may have not made it to task 4, and that would have been homework for them, as opposed to those who worked with kids who were good for them to work with, that they knew they could be productive with. They didn't have homework. So jumped the gun a little bit, but working with someone they decided to work with really provided natural consequences for them. So with this task list, basically they have, I gave them all directions as a class. Although my first period I tried this out with, I didn't provide it as a class. I provided directions to each group, and then I changed it up for the second class period that I worked with. And it worked a lot better and was a lot more efficient when I told the entire class the directions rather than each individual group. So essentially, they were given a task, which was task 1. And task 1, they had a packet, and they had to do some matching with a couple of different graphs and descriptors. So with those graphs and descriptors, they would work with their partner, and they would match up the graphs and descriptions, and then write out what was happening at each segment, check their answers, so self-assess at one of my lab stations. Once they got that done, they came up and they marked the task either with a check mark or an X, and then they moved on to task 2. And at task 2, then they went to Google Classroom to open questions they needed to answer together. And when they were done answering those questions, they would again go self-assess at one of the lab stations, and at station 6. So they'd come up, check again, they would go check their answers at station 6, turn that into the class periods tray, check that off, and then they would move on to task 4. So they are self-directing as they are moving through this class period. And so they had opportunities to work with their partners, task 1, 2, and 3. Task 4, this was the second time I actually tried this, they could then work independently, or were supposed to work independently, because on the first time I tried this, kids wanted to work on their own once it got here, but I had them working with their partner again, and there were a lot of kids like, can I work by myself? So I had them work on their own simply because kids wanted to, and on the quiz, they can't work with a partner on the quiz. So then they would come up and say, they wouldn't check this off unless they were finished, and they checked their answers, and they showed me they were done. If they had any issues, they would grab a red marker, and let's say Haley and Alicia maybe had a question on task 2. So they've already gotten through task 1. They have a question on task 2. They would put a red X. So as I'm working with small groups that I was polling at the same time, I could see the red X, and I could come up and help them with whatever issues they were having. Then they could erase it. Once they had that resolved, check off again, and move on. This kept them accountable and on task as I was working with small groups that I had pulled through this class period.
So is this for a week, a day, a month? How long did that last?
I ended up using this for a couple of days, and I've used a couple of different task lists throughout, especially throughout the motion unit. That worked out really well with this one because some kids were further along in their understanding of the math that goes with motion and forces. And so those kids who were struggling with those on formatives were the ones I was pulling aside while groups were working on their tasks.
Okay, and what were some positives that you noticed from the system?
The kids really enjoyed this. I asked them just informally, what do you think about this? Do you think this was a good strategy for you? Did you like working at your own pace, whether with a partner or on your own? Because some kids did work on their own through all of it. And I was okay with that. If you didn't want to work with a partner, you don't have to. Because we do plenty of group work and partner work. But they enjoyed partly just like coming up and being like, woohoo, I'm done with this section. And then they're like, yes, we're done here. So it was kind of like they were holding themselves accountable, but it was sort of a little bit of a competition to make sure that they were on the same pace as everybody else. It's, minuscule, like I get to check this off, but they love that. And the kids who really, some of the kids who don't necessarily excel in science, I think also found this to be good because then they were like, shoot, I'm still on task 1. I should be on task 3 with everybody else, but I'm going real slow, so I need to step up the pace.
What were some negatives that you found from this system?
I don't know if I actually had any negatives, to be honest. This really kept my kids on track, kept them working at a pace that they should be working at, except for those kids who slack a little bit. And the ones who I'd pull aside, too, to work with independently, that kind of got them a little behind. So that's a kink I need to work out. But besides that, it really worked because having them write the X's up here gave them an opportunity to show me I need help, and I would see that right away. And I'd say either come back to me or I'll be right there.
Okay.
And so I don't think there were really any negatives because you could use this with any unit.
So it sounds like some keys were putting the directions on the actual list, making sure that essentially they were checking off a task approximately every day, and that the student was the one that owned checking things off, that it was their communication tool with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else when you think about this, you think, man, this was a secret or a key that made this successful for myself and my students?
I don't think so. I think having the directions on the task list really provided them to work without me. That was incredibly beneficial and allowed for me to just work with those small groups of kids and not have to worry about, okay, do they know what they're supposed to be doing next? Should they be here? Should they be there? The directions on the entire task list really just provided 100% self-motivated learning.
And then lastly, do you feel that having the weight of a partner that as long as they stayed on track they got to work with motivated students to work and do hard things, or do you feel like that was just an extra bonus? It didn't influence the work?
I think it was probably a little of both. I think for some of the kids who are already high flyers and who move quickly, they didn't, it was just a bonus. But for some kids who maybe don't always excel, that helped to push them a little bit further than those who are always at the front end of class and always finishing first. Those kids, it was just a bonus. But for those who somewhat struggle in science, if they got to work with a partner, I think that pushed them to move at a faster pace and pushed their understanding a little bit further.
All right. Thank you very much, Morgan.
You're welcome.